She didn't look like someone who belonged in first class, at least not to those who judged by appearances. Her hoodie was old, the hem of her jeans slightly frayed, and her shoes were a tired pair of white sneakers that had seen far better days. In one arm, she carried a faded diaper bag. With the other, she held the hand of her 5-year-old son, who walked beside her with the soft innocence of a child who had no idea the world could be cruel to his mother because of how she looked. The airport bustled with early morning travelers, suits in polished shoes, tourists in loud shirts, children dragging tiny suitcases. But amid all the chaos, she moved with calm purpose. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. Her boarding pass clearly said Seat 1A. But the moment she stepped into the line for first class, she felt it. That familiar tension, sharp and subtle, like an invisible wall being raised in front of her. Eyes flicked toward her, lips pressed into judgment, and heads turned in disbelief. The flight attendant at the gate noticed her, and her painted-on smile flickered with something colder beneath the surface. She gave a tight nod, scanned her badge, and then looked the woman over from head to toe, as if checking for a mistake. The woman held out her ticket with steady fingers. Her voice never raised, but the attendant didn't hide her suspicion. People behind her in line began whispering, and though she couldn't hear every word, she didn't need to. She had lived this moment in 1,000 different places, in 100 different ways, stores, restaurants, schools, sidewalks. She had learned to stay calm, to say nothing, to let her silence speak. She simply moved forward, as if none of them existed. But the moment she stepped past the velvet rope, the attendant stepped in her way and scanned the pass again, slower this time, as if expecting it to magically turn into a coach seat. The delay drew attention. The line grew longer. An older man, 2 seats behind her, scoffed loudly, muttering something about standards. Still, she waited. Her son yawned beside her and tugged gently on her sleeve. She gave his hand a squeeze. The attendant finally handed the ticket back, still clearly dissatisfied, and motioned her toward the cabin with a mechanical wave. She entered the plane quietly, settled into Seat 1A, and helped her son into the seat beside her. No apology was offered, no assistance given. Other passengers looked her way, puzzled or dismissive. A woman in a silk dress 2 seats back raised an eyebrow and clutched her handbag a little tighter. But the mother didn't react. She simply opened her son's snack box, handed him a juice pouch, and then leaned back into the seat as if she had done this 100 times before, because she had. What they didn't know was that this woman, this black single mom they had dismissed and doubted, wasn't just flying first class. She was there on assignment. Her identity was buried under layers of redacted files and classified operations. She wasn't wearing a badge, and she never would, but her presence on that plane was more than casual. She had been placed there with purpose, because someone important was boarding, someone under surveillance, and she had to be close. The boarding agent nearly derailed the entire operation with her prejudice, but the woman didn't escalate. She didn't need to. She had learned long ago that the most dangerous weapon in her arsenal was not a gun or a badge. It was patience. She had worn disguises in foreign cities, tracked fugitives through chaotic war zones, and spoken 7 languages to blend in when it mattered. Today, she blended in as a tired mother with a child on her lap and a backpack full of diapers. What no one knew was that beneath that backpack, buried in the lining of the diaper bag, was a transmitter, and in her phone case, there was a covert scanner connected to a satellite feed. While others were sipping champagne and unfolding newspapers, she was tracking a signal. Someone was coming on that flight who shouldn't be, and she had less than 30 minutes to confirm it. The flight attendant walked up the aisle again, checking the overhead bins, giving her a second glance with lingering suspicion. The mother looked out the window. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She had trained for years to hold composure under pressure, to remain unreadable. The mission wasn't over. It had barely begun. But as the plane doors began to close, she whispered a silent code into the receiver tucked beneath her collar. The flight wouldn't take off until she had eyes on the target. And while the world still saw a black woman who didn't look like she belonged, the truth was that she was the only one on that plane who truly knew why every seat was being watched. She wasn't there for luxury. She was there for justice. The doors were closed, the cabin lights dimmed, and the crew went through their motions like any other flight. Safety demonstrations, final bag checks, whispers exchanged behind thin curtains. But something was off. The wheels didn't move. The engine didn't roar. The plane sat still on the tarmac longer than it should have. The pilot made a soft announcement over the intercom, apologizing for a technical delay. But in truth, nothing was broken, except a protocol that couldn't be explained to passengers. The mother stayed in her seat, cradling her son's head as he drifted into a light nap. She stared straight ahead, her face blank but focused. Beneath her hoodie, her earpiece buzzed with a faint pulse, and her fingers tapped a rhythmic code on the soft seat arm. 3 taps, pause. 2 taps, long hold. It was a confirmation signal. The plane was grounded until her target was confirmed. She wasn't here by accident. Her presence had been planned for weeks, her identity buried under a name that didn't exist on any national database. Not even the pilot knew who she really was, and no one in the cabin had any idea that their delay wasn't weather-related. It was criminal-related. A man on that flight was a known link to an international trafficking ring. The FBI had been chasing shadows for years, but only recently did they discover he'd be boarding Flight 762 in 1st class under a false passport. His role wasn't violence, it was logistics, transporting information, smuggling codes inside seemingly innocent documents, walking through metal detectors with nothing illegal in his pockets, but corruption in his silence. He was careful, he was quiet, but he was now on the move, and she was his silent shadow. 2 rows behind her, the man sat alone, gray suit, neat beard, expression calm and unreadable. To the world, he was a businessman with tired eyes and a carry-on, but she knew what his resume really looked like. She'd seen the aftermath of his work. Girls sold across borders. Children disappeared without a sound. And now, he was right here, flipping through a magazine like he wasn't the ghost behind so many broken lives. She shifted slightly, pretending to adjust her son's blanket. But in truth, she had triggered a visual scan from the lens hidden in her left earring. The image fed directly to a secure server. Facial match came back in seconds. Positive ID. 78% confidence level, rising. He was the one. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Instead, she sent the second signal. 5 taps, long hold, immediate verification. The flight attendant passed by again, pretending to smile at passengers, but her eyes still lingered on the mother in 1A. Something about her made her uneasy. She couldn't place it. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the way she hadn't touched her phone in an hour, or maybe deep down she felt the shame crawling in her chest for how she'd tried to block her earlier. She glanced down at the boarding manifest again and frowned. It didn't say anything unusual, but something inside her told her she'd made a mistake. Meanwhile, the mother's thoughts moved faster than the jet ever could. She replayed every detail, the suspect's hands, his breathing, the bag he carried. She tracked every cough, every blink, every button he pressed. He didn't recognize her. That was the gift of the cover. No one ever suspected the tired black mother with a snack pouch and a baby wipe tucked in her wrist. That was how she walked into secrets, stole voices, and vanished again. Her son shifted and yawned. She kissed his head. She had trained herself to split her mind in 2, to hold love and danger in the same breath. That was the hardest part. Not the missions, not the weapons, but pretending to be normal while watching monsters sleep. The cabin crew began moving again. The delay had stretched just long enough. The clearance came through. The pilot was told the error was resolved. But it wasn't an error. It was a trap. The moment the wheels left the ground, the airspace became her shield. No one could escape at 30,000 feet, not without jumping into the sky, and that's exactly what she needed. The man would be contained once the cabin door sealed. Her job now was to record every behavior, every sign of communication, every slip in posture. She had a 4-hour flight to build a case that couldn't be ignored. Other passengers finally relaxed. Drinks were offered. The clouds swallowed the view below. But she didn't close her eyes. She didn't blink longer than a second. Every gesture from him was logged. Every sip of water, every tap on his tablet. He didn't know he was walking into a storm, but the sky had already been claimed by justice, and she was the one piloting its course. As the plane soared into sunlight, the woman leaned back, closed her eyes only halfway, and waited. Her mission had only just begun. But the moment that boarding agent had questioned her right to be there, she had already proven something bigger. First class isn't about what you wear, it's about what you carry inside. And right now, she was carrying the weight of an entire operation. The seat she was nearly denied, it was the seat that would break open one of the largest criminal networks in modern history, and no one, even the woman who had doubted her, would be able to deny who she really was once this flight landed. Because justice, like planes, may be delayed, but it always takes off when it's ready. The clouds curled like thick white curtains outside the small window, soft and deceptive, masking the tension rising inside the cabin. At 30,000 feet, every footstep became an echo, every cough a message, every blink a question waiting to be answered. The flight attendant finally gave up trying to smile at the woman in seat 1A. She sensed it now, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it was the stillness, the precision, the unbothered poise of a woman who'd been challenged but never cracked. The mother's son was now sleeping, head leaning against her elbow, thumb in his mouth, safe and unaware that his mother was scanning danger 2 rows behind them while keeping his dreams untouched. Her fingers, tucked under a blanket, were still active. The scanner in her palm, smaller than a credit card, was silently analyzing the signals coming from the suspect's carry-on. A data burst appeared in her earpiece, not a full transmission, but enough to confirm he had a hidden device, one rigged with a delay-timed information drop, the kind used in covert exchanges where files are dumped to a shadow network just before landing. That meant the clock was ticking. He was calm. That much was clear. He had taken off his shoes, placed his coat in the overhead bin, and ordered black coffee. He smiled at the attendant when she brought it. He even helped an elderly man get his tray down. But the woman in seat 1A had seen that smile before, on faces that burned houses behind them, on men who walked out of interrogation rooms without blinking. Evil, she'd learned, didn't always wear anger. Sometimes it smiled, charmed, and tipped generously. But what he didn't know was that his kindness was being documented in digital ink. Every glance, every breath, every keystroke he made on his tablet synced directly to the receiver in her waistband. A team of forensic analysts on the ground was already watching the feed. The woman never moved her head, never raised her hand. She breathed with intention, let her body stay warm so the sweat wouldn't form on her palms. She kept her heart rate low, her spine straight. The mission depended on clarity, and clarity required stillness. He got up once, just once, walked casually to the lavatory. She noted the time, noted the gait of his steps, noted the bump of his wrist against the seat backs as he passed by. She noted the angle of the carry-on he left behind. She had spent months memorizing what criminals tried to forget. Details, things they overlooked, what they touched, where they looked when no one was watching, and she was always watching. The moment he disappeared into the bathroom, she slid her scanner slightly upward and ran a silent sweep. The bag beeped quietly in her earpiece, a faint electronic pulse. Confirmed. Hidden storage layer, beneath the fabric. Not metal, fiber composite. A signal-emitting unit sewn under the lining. He thought it was invisible. He didn't know she was trained to see through shadows. The scan continued. The transmitter was active, but hadn't sent its payload yet. That meant he was waiting for a signal, likely a geo-triggered burst that would activate when the plane entered a specific range, probably 100 miles before descent. She had roughly 2 hours. 2 hours to disable it, identify the source, and issue a redirect order to the cyber team. There was no way she'd let that package land. Her fingers moved faster now, her left knee bouncing once to shake off tension. She pulled a blanket higher over her child, tapped 3 times near the seatbelt buckle, confirmation tone. Her team received the update. The sky outside turned deeper, more golden as they cruised toward sunset. The colors bled through the windows like a painting stretching across time. But there was no beauty in this mission, only urgency. The man returned to his seat, looked relaxed, but his eyes gave a flicker too long toward the flight map screen above them. That flicker told her everything. He was watching the distance, tracking the location, waiting for the trigger zone. She activated the signal jammer in her device. It was disguised as a toddler music toy inside the diaper bag. The moment she pressed it, his carry-on blinked, just once, and the light on its inner lining failed to activate. He blinked too, looked down, checked his phone, no service. Checked again, a subtle frown. She saw it all without turning her head. The trap had begun to close. She leaned back, closing her eyes, but behind her lids she reviewed every protocol. When the flight descended, agents would be waiting in silent positions, and her job was to ensure the data didn't escape in any direction, digitally or physically. She reached down, slowly, gently, adjusting her son's sock, but at the same time pulled out a second scanner from the side compartment of her bag. It was shaped like a pacifier, but housed a microchip blocker. She activated it and dropped it into her son's sock as a decoy measure, knowing the suspect might attempt an emergency dump scan. She prepared for everything, even the panic button she'd planted near the oxygen mask behind the cabin divider. Every piece of that plane had become her courtroom. The evidence was in motion, and the jury, though unseen, was already deliberating from satellite screens and secure vans far below. The man leaned forward now, elbows on knees, rubbing his palms slowly. He felt something, a change, but he couldn't explain it. The energy had shifted, and he sensed eyes where none should have been. He glanced toward the front of the cabin, toward her, but she was already turned slightly away, humming a soft lullaby to her son. There was no suspicion in her frame, no warning in her eyes, but the judgment was coming. Not from passengers, not from flight crew, but from the justice he thought he had outrun. And when that plane landed, he would... The mother he almost ignored was the executioner he never saw coming. The sky, once his hiding place, had become her courtroom. And now, the verdict was forming with every breath she took. The descent began with a quiet tone that chimed through the cabin, followed by the captain's familiar voice announcing their approach and expected landing time. Seatbacks were raised, tray tables locked, and the curtains between classes opened wide. But what most passengers didn't notice was the silent dance of positioning happening behind the scenes. The suspect's pulse had quickened. She could hear it without even trying. Her device, embedded beneath the surface of her seat, registered the uptick in biometric response. He knew something wasn't right. The transmission hadn't gone out. His connection had failed. And with the flight now tilting toward land, his time had run out. She reached beneath her armrest with subtle grace, brushing her hand across a hidden pad the size of a coin. Her fingers tapped the final confirmation code. That signal shot down to the tarmac where 4 unmarked black vehicles were already parked just beyond the terminal. Inside them were agents dressed not in uniforms but in silence. Their faces showed no emotion, their eyes held no mercy. They weren't there for a scene, they were there for justice. As the plane dropped lower, she removed the blanket from her sleeping child and gently placed the diaper bag at her feet, her body positioned like any mother preparing to disembark. No tension, no rush, only control. The suspect stood early, too early. The plane hadn't stopped taxiing yet. He reached for the overhead bin, hesitated, then sat down again, feigning a smile to the person beside him. He felt eyes, he felt pressure, but he didn't know where it came from. She watched the way his hand lingered on the zipper of his carry-on. She knew he was debating something, possibly a trigger, possibly a last-minute message, but it was too late. The jammer had fried the outbound ports, the payload had been quarantined mid-air. What he thought would pass unseen had been intercepted before the wings even touched ground. She let him fidget. Let him breathe deep. Let him believe for just a few more seconds that he still had options. The plane rolled to a final stop. Phones came alive with signal, seatbelts unlatched. Passengers stood, eager to leave, unaware that the cabin door would not open until the final clearance was delivered. She remained seated. She brushed crumbs off her son's lap and adjusted her hoodie, calm, unshaken. Then it happened. The pilot's voice returned, unusually hesitant, requesting that all passengers remain seated for a brief security protocol. A few murmurs of confusion spread through the rows. A child asked why they had to wait. The woman in the silk dress huffed. The man behind her in a navy suit checked his watch twice. But no one dared question it too loudly. Footsteps approached the plane door from outside, measured, deliberate. The sound of metal latches echoed through the cabin as the door unsealed, not with the usual swing of welcome, but with authority. 3 men stepped in. They didn't look at anyone else. They didn't speak to the crew. They walked directly to seat 2B. The man tried to smile, tried to ask what the issue was. But before he could finish forming a sentence, his wrists were secured behind his back and the bag he held so tightly was taken from his hand. Inside it, hidden behind a false bottom, were digital ledgers, identity transfers, and photos that had never been meant to see daylight. Gasps filled the cabin. A woman clutched her pearls. A teenager began filming. The flight attendant, who had once questioned the mother's presence, stood paralyzed, her clipboard trembling in her hands. And then, as if orchestrated by fate, the lead agent turned his head and gave a subtle nod to the woman in seat 1A. She returned it with stillness, lifting her child gently and placing him against her shoulder. The man in cuffs looked at her now, looked and knew that the storm he'd walked into had been shaped by the woman he almost overlooked. She rose slowly, diaper bag in hand, and stepped into the aisle. Her walk was quiet. No victory, no vengeance, no gloating in her posture, just purpose. As she passed the flight attendant, there was no confrontation, no need for words. The look in her eyes was more powerful than any rebuke. The shame on the attendant's face was enough. Her silence was her sentence. Her assumption had nearly ruined an entire federal operation. And now, she would remember that lesson every time she saw a tired mother in first class. The agents waited at the door, parting as she passed through. She walked down the jet bridge, her son now stirring in her arms, blinking slowly at the sudden light. Reporters would never know her name. Cameras would never capture her face. That was the cost of her work. But justice had been delivered, and the skies had been cleared by a woman no one had expected. Hours later, the story broke. News sites flashed headlines about a shocking mid-flight arrest. An international suspect detained before touching down. Passengers gave their versions, some saying they felt something off, others claiming they suspected all along. But the truth was this: none of them had seen what was coming, except her. She returned home that night, tucked her son into bed, and folded the hoodie she wore into a drawer already filled with other disguises. Each one told a story. Each one had played a part in bringing justice from shadows. She poured herself a glass of water, stood at the window, and watched the sky. Somewhere up there, another flight moved through the stars. And somewhere down here, one mother had changed the course of justice, without needing a badge, a title, or applause. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear tired sneakers and carry juice boxes. And sometimes they sit in seat 1A, quiet, watching, ready.
If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me bring more heartfelt stories to life, one soul at a time.